In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make this handy storage box. Now this is the perfect size for 6 packs of fat quarters, but of course you don't have to just use it for fat quarters. This could be for storing other sewing notions, bits and bobs, things in the bedroom, things in the bathroom. That's entirely up to you. Now to stiffen it, to make it a little bit firmer, I've used Decovil Light. Now you could use the Decovil Heavy, you could use a Bosal foam, but it needs to be quite a firm interfacing because we want the box to actually stand up on its own. So it's not 100% rigid, but it is firm enough to stand up like so. And it's really easy to work with as well. So it's a single-sided fusible stabilizer. And this actually feels, if you haven't used it before, on the one side it feels a little bit leathery, and on the other side it's a little bit shiny. That's the adhesive side, so that's the side that we're going to stick to the back of our fabric. Now I'm going to put all of the cutting details and your fabric requirements in the description box underneath the video right now, so have a read through those. Those will be in metric and in imperial. I'll be talking in inches throughout this, but I will put the imperial in the description box. But it's really simple to make. You only need 3 pieces of materials. So you need your interfacing, you will need your outer fabric, and you'll need a lining fabric. A non-directional outer fabric would be ideal because we're going to fold this up. So one side's going to end up upside down if you have a directional fabric. So first of all, cut your interfacing or your Decovil Light to 16 inches in length and 13 inches across. And I'm going to cut out the corners on this, which is what's going to create the box shape. So let me find my ruler, there we go. So I need to cut a 4-inch square from each corner. So I'll just take my ruler and a pen. It's easier to draw on the rougher side of your Decovil and mark an exact 4-inch square. Now you can make these boxes any size you like, as long as the corners that you cut out are perfect squares, because these 2 sides are going to meet up. So if one's longer than the other, then you're not going to get a perfect shaped box. So if you wanted your box to be wider and narrower, then cut your Decovil to the same size, but make the box 3 inches instead of 4 inches. And of course you could make a square box, you could make a rectangular box. If you're not too sure what size you want or what size you need, then make it out of paper first. Simply cut this out of a piece of paper, cut the corners out and fold at the sides, put some tape on them. That's going to be the finished size of your box. So if you do want to make one much bigger or much smaller, then have a play, have an experiment like that. I find with this size, for something like fat quarters that obviously I'm keeping in mine, I wouldn't go any bigger or any longer with it because they're quite heavy, so that it'll bow in the middle when you try and pick them up. So I'm literally cutting out all of the corners. I'll save these bits for something else. I think they're big enough to use on another project. I don't know what yet, but we'll have to think about that one. And number 3. And here's the 4th one. Then we're going to iron this to the wrong side of the outer fabric. So I'll just bring up my ironing pad, pop that down. And place this over the top. Don't put the edge of your fabric right up against the edge of the Decovil because we need a seam allowance. So I'd add an extra 1/2 inch. So don't be too tight with the fabric. And then we'll iron this down. So a hot iron, no steam with your Decovil, and just try and make sure that the very edges are stuck down. So I'm just feeling that to make sure that it's straight. So take your time with this. You can feel where the edge of the Decovil is. It is easier to iron from the fabric side than it is from the lining side. And as hot an iron as your fabric will actually take. Now for the base of this, I'm going to make it a little bit different because you do bag it out, so there will be a turning gap to sew closed. And I want the turning gap to be right in the bottom of the box, so the edges are kept nice and neat. So for the lining, I'm actually going to sew 2 pieces of fabric together, so there's a seam across the bottom. That will become clearer when I actually do it. Hello, Bob. So again, just making sure it may lift up a little bit, but it doesn't really matter. Don't know what's happening outside, but obviously something's disturbing her. And to these corners. And again, go over this a few times, just make sure that it really is stuck down. I think that will do. So that's on my outer fabric. Now with the lining, I'm just going to bring my cutting mat up now. Again, I want the seam to be down the centre. So my lining fabric is obviously bigger than I need it to be. So I'm literally going to chop this in half. And then sew it back together again. So I'm going to sew down here with about 1/2 inch or 1 centimetre seam allowance. Apologies for the barking, there must be a little bit of excitement going on outside today. So back you go. And right in the centre, I'm going to make a gap of about, I don't know, enough to get your hand in, so not too narrow. And then carry on sewing. Then I'm going to press that seam open. And then we'll use the outer section as a template to cut this one. We'll do that in just a second. Right, so I'll put that to one side for a second. Bring back my cutting mat, just knock my sewing machine with it then. And my outer fabric. Now I'm going to cut 1/4 inch, or about 6 millimeters, around the edge of this. That's going to be my seam allowance. So if you prefer a larger seam allowance, that's fine, because basically we're going to sew along the edge of the Decovil. That's where our seam is going to be. So I'm cutting as much as I can with my rotary cutter, because I find it neater. And then I'll cut the cutout squares with scissors, because I'm better at that than trying to get a rotary cutter into the corners. So I'm not going to measure this. You can if you wanted to, but I can kind of see where that 1/4 inch is going to be. So basically I'm going to end up with my fabric 1/4 inch bigger than my Decovil all the way around. Oops. There we go. So 2 more to go here. Now this is actually a project that I made in a live stream, and somebody suggested that you could put handles on it. Now you could, and if you're going to do that, you need to do that at this point before you put the whole thing together. So you could make little handles and put them on the side. Or what the idea was, which I thought was really good, snip that, was to make a little handle on the front here, so that if you have all of your boxes all in a row on a shelf, you've got a little handle that you can pull them out with. So do that now, just here. You can use a ribbon, you could use a piece of fabric that you already have, but that would go right now just in the center here on one of the end pieces. So I'm not going to do that for this project, but that's an idea if you wanted to customize yours a little bit more. Okay, so here's my lining piece. There's my gap, and I'm going to cut out the same shape. So I've put the seam straight down the center, and I'm going to cut out the same shape from the lining fabric as this fabric. So let's just chop the selvage off there. That's the bottom. So just like before, I'm literally cutting around the outline. Don't have to use a rotary cutter if you don't have one, but it just give you a really nice straight line. And then I'm going to cut out the corners with my scissors. And if you wanted to pin that, then of course you can do, just to hold it together while you're cutting. Right, so I don't need the cutting mat anymore, that can go back down. And these are the two pieces that we have. So now I'm going to take the outer piece first of all and fold the corners so that they match. And you can feel where the edge of the Decovil is. You can pin or clip that if you wish, but it's quite easy not to. And then sew along the edge of the Decovil. Don't worry if you do catch a little bit of it, it's not going to make too much difference. But if you try and just run your needle on the fabric, just at the edge of the Decovil is the ideal place for it. And then it's a back stitch at the end. And then the same with the second corner. So again, fold it so that the edges meet, and sew. And we'll do this with all four corners. And then we're going to turn this the right side out. Now you may find that some of the Decovil starts lifting a little bit. This one has. So it doesn't really make any difference. But if you wanted to pop that back again under the iron, let's do that. You can kind of stick it back down again. So don't worry too much if it happens, but if you want to, you can just, as I said, run the iron back over the edge like I am here and just stick it back down again. Okay, then we're going to take the lining piece and sew this in exactly the same way. So fold up the corners with the seams together and sew every one of these pieces. And you're going to use your 1/4 inch seam allowance again, so you've got the same seam allowance as you had on the outer part of the box. Then we'll take the outer section of the box and drop that inside the lining, so the right sides are together. So my lining is inside out, my outer is the right side out, and just drop this inside and match up the seams on the corners like so. If you wanted to put some clips or pins in there, then that's an idea. And I'm not worried about pressing seams open or anything like that, but I'm just going to push them to in opposite directions. So let's just match up the corners and then we'll sew. Now I'm going to use the edge of the Decovil, just like I did with the sides. That's going to be my seam. And I prefer to sew on the inside. You'll see that in just a second. Just because what I'm used to, my main machine that I use doesn't have a free arm. So if I want to sew anything like this, it has to be from the inside. But if you prefer to use a free arm, then you may wish to turn this thing the whole way through, because otherwise, let me show you, if you use a free arm and you're sewing this way, you're not going to see the edge of the Decovil. So turn the whole thing the other side out, so you're sewing along here. If you're sewing like I do on the inside, then this way is fine. So I'm literally going to sew all the way around the top with my stitches running just along the edge of the Decovil, and just make sure that those raw edges line up. You could put some more pins or clips in there if you prefer. So again, take your time with it. Start and stop with your needle down, because you will kind of have to stop and maneuver this as you come to the corners. And as before, if you do catch a little bit of the Decovil, don't go unpicking it or anything. It won't make any difference really. So again, just around the corners. Keep all of this out of the way. That looks very kind of clumpy and clumsy. But as long as where you're sewing is nice and flat, that's the main thing. So just coming up along the final side here. Just making sure my raw edges are lined up as I sew. So just back around here. Again, the Decovil's lifted up a little bit, but I'm not concerned about that. And then we can turn the whole thing through that turning gap that I left in the bottom. It may look a little bit crumpled when you turn it through, but we're going to iron this again anyway, so don't worry about that. So just push it through. Push out your corners. And then we'll deal with this turning gap. Now, if this is for you, this is probably going to be full most of the time. You're not going to see that gap. So I would, just like I would do with the handbag, pull the sides of the seam away from each other and make a stitch on my sewing machine very close to the edge. If this is going to be something maybe that you're selling or you're giving as a gift, it's nice to have that seam a little bit neater in the bottom, because when the box is empty, you are going to see inside it. So in which case, I'd use a ladder stitch. So I'm going to go into one side with my hand sewing needle. Normally I'd use the same colour thread, but this is going to be pretty invisible. And take my needle into one side of the fold and into the other. And the smaller the stitches you make, the more invisible they're going to be. So just, you can see why it's called a ladder stitch, because as you make the stitches, it looks like the rungs of a ladder. And then every so often you're just going to pull the thread and the stitches disappear. If I had a favourite hand sewing stitch, Forget about all of the embroidery or cross stitch or anything like that, or smocking or anything else. That's my favourite stitch. I just find it so satisfying. So I'll just snip off the end of the thread, and then we'll push the lining inside. And because we've sewn up against the edge of the Decovil, it's very easy then to create a nice crisp edge across the top here. I'm going to iron that, and then we'll sew around the top. So I can just pull the fabric so that you see the seam on the top there, and give it a quick press. This will help to re-stick down any of that Decovil that lifted up again as well, actually. There we go. Just keep going. This may seem quite time consuming, but it is worth it, because it's a lot easier to sew the pressed seam than it is to sew as you go, so to speak. So to speak is a good name for a channel, isn't it? Right, almost there. And then literally I'm going to top stitch all the way around the top. And again, I prefer to do that from the inside, but it's up to you. No, let's do it the other way. Let's take the free arm off and sew this way. Whatever you're used to. Let's fold that in a little bit more. So I can lengthen the stitch a little bit here. I'm going to go up to 2.8 on my machine. And I'm stitching just a couple of millimetres, or maybe about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. That back on again now. Then it's back with the ironing pad, and I'm just going to put a bit of a crease in the sides here. So I'm going to pinch where the seam is and press, pinch and press. On all four corners. And then we'll do this around the base as well, actually. It gives it a really nice crisp finish. So feel where the bottom is, or the bottom of the seams, and crease there. And press. It's quite easy actually, because it almost wants to form this box shape. And final one here. And then I've just noticed the inside's a little bit creased, so I'm just going to iron inside there as well. So that's enough with the iron for now. I've just got a loose thread I need to chop off there. And then the final thing I'm going to do is to just put a little stitch line just into the corners, just to help that keep its shape. So I'm going to pinch the corner. You'll find it easier to sew from the bottom upwards, and just sew about 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres quite close to the edge, and that'll help to kind of keep the box a box shape. Take it slowly when you come up to the top bits as well, because there's quite a lot of fabric that you're sewing through there. So your machine may find it a little bit easier if you sew slowly. You can measure and mark the distance if you wanted to. I'm just kind of doing it by eye, as in the length of the stitches, so just about an inch will be fine. And then you can see it really makes a difference, doesn't it? It really helps to keep the box shaped. And I do this no matter what kind of interfacing you're using. So if you are using a foam instead of the Decovil, then maybe a little bit more chunky to sew through, but I'd still point the corners like this. And that's another box finished. So I'm running out of fat quarters. I'm going to use the same ones. So the size of this one, again, is perfect for fat quarter size, and you should be able to fit 6 packs in there altogether. 4, 5, well that's 4 o'clock then, and 6. Now if you wanted to decorate this, at this point when it's all finished, you could actually add a trim, maybe put a ribbon trim all the way around, would look really nice. You could add a bow or something. If it's a plique or any of that kind of decoration that you wanted to make, then do that at the beginning before you start folding everything up together. If you do have any of those kind of embellishments that you want to pop on there, then that would be the time to do it. Just got one more loose thread there I need to snip off. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. It's a really useful box, isn't it? So if you do have lots of fat quarters or small pieces of fabric or your scraps, if you save them, then that's ideal for you. And again, I do like the size of that. It's not going to be too floppy even with heavy things in. And if you've got more than 6 packs of fat quarters, which you probably have, then you can have a whole lot of the boxes all lined up on your shelf, so it keeps you nice and neat and organised. And of course you can have coordinating colours as well. That would look lovely. So again, enjoy making yours, make lots and lots of them. I hope you find this useful, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.